Hi, welcome to Let's Talk Real Estate. I'm your host, Charlie Flannery, and my guest today is attorney Burke Fountain. Burke, welcome back to Let's Talk Real Estate.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Burke was one of my first guests when we began shooting the show just about a year ago, and it's good to have you back.
Good to be here.
Good to have you back. It would have happened sooner, but we broke down over the signing bonus negotiations,
Right.
and I had to give you some time to liquidate some assets to come up with the cash. But one of the things we're going to be talking about during this episode and in a second episode is mortgages and foreclosures. And we're going to start out with a basic explanation of what a mortgage is. Now, I get people that come to me all the time and they say, we're going to buy a piece of real estate and we're going to the bank to get a mortgage. And I always correct them and I say, no, you're going to the bank to get a loan. You're going to give a mortgage to the bank. So now that I've kind of confused the whole audience, why don't you explain what getting a mortgage actually means?
Sure. At a real estate closing back in the old days that you might remember, there used to be two pieces of paper that got signed. One was a note, one was a mortgage. The note is the IOU. It explains how much you're going to pay a month, how many years you're going to pay, and the terms. A note is just a piece of paper, and it's your promise to pay, and it's proof that you owe the money. The mortgage is a security instrument. It pledges your real estate. It's just like when you take a car loan and they take the title to the car. And personal property, business equipment, there's another piece of paper. But a mortgage is for real estate. So you sign a note and you sign a mortgage, and you are correct. The bank isn't giving you the mortgage. You are signing your name and handing the mortgage to the bank. They are the mortgagee, the holder of the mortgage.
So the mortgage is a lien on the property,
A lien on the
not
property.
the loan itself.
That's right.
Yeah.
And at the mortgage gets recorded just like a deed at the registry of deeds. Now, again, the note doesn't. That's just a piece of paper saying I owe you. But the mortgage gets recorded at the registry of deeds, so it's a public record, and everybody knows that you owe the bank the money and that they have a lien on the property. And if you try to sell the property, you won't be able to, because the person buying it is going to look at those public records and say, well, wait a minute, I'm not handing you the check. This bank has to get paid. And if someone comes along and sues you and wants to put a lien against the property, they would be in second place behind the bank.
Okay.
So that's a note and a mortgage, and that's what takes place up front when you borrow the money.
So in many cases, that's what sets the stage for the foreclosure process. It's that mortgage instrument
Yes.
that gives that bank the right to move against you.
Absolutely. And if there isn't a mortgage, or if the mortgage is somehow defective, and occasionally a bankruptcy court finds that the mortgage wasn't filled out properly and is therefore not valid. But presuming the paperwork was done properly, the bank has a valid lien against the real estate, and as long as you pay on time every month, you're all set.
Now, and that applies even if the paperwork is sold, even if that mortgage is sold as a security
Yes,
instrument to
as-
20 different successive investors.
As frequently happens today, it's happened many times in the past, and it's gotten more complicated, but the bank typically sells the loan to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, which are a couple of companies that have been set up by the federal government, Federal National Mortgage Association and Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corp. And they were set up by the government so that banks could, in fact, sell loans and get their money back so they could go out and make another loan. And it really worked well until people came up with some more creative ideas. But I remember when I started 30 years ago, it was just changing, but banks would hold loans, and Bank A over on this side of town was making loans and Bank B wasn't. Well, Bank A had money because it had a bunch of depositors come in and leave money, so they wanted to put it to use, and this bank didn't have any right now. And do you remember those days?
Sure.
You know,
And that's how this system came about, so that there'd be liquidity all across the country.
That's right. All of these banks, as soon as they made the loan, could sell the loan on to the government, get their money back so they could make another loan. And it made a huge difference in the number of people who were able to go out and get loans. So it was a good system. I don't want to jump ahead too much, but briefly, where the problem has come up in the past 5 or 8 years is that they have packaged these loans in such a way that they put hundreds or thousands of loans together and then sell them off to some pension fund or something. Mm-hmm. And at that point, there really isn't any person or company that really owns the loan. It's, you know, you've got an IRA and I'm a teacher in my teacher's pension fund. You've got a 1/1000th interest in that guy's house and I've got a 1/20,000th interest in that guy's house. It's so complicated.
So if I go to the Acme Bank and Trust
Mm-hmm.
and apply for a loan, they approve it, we close, they attach a mortgage, and then the Acme Bank and Trust wants to sell off that loan so they can fund another loan. That's sold off through Fannie and Freddie in what they call the secondary market,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the terms of my note or my mortgage, my interest rate can't change unless it's an adjustable, and none of the terms can be changed by
your original contract. A contract is a contract.
Okay.
And both sides are bound by the terms of that contract. And not just with real estate, but whatever a contract is for anything, if one of the parties wants to sell their interest to it, let's say I mow your lawn, mm-hmm. and we've got a contract that I'm going to mow your lawn once a week for $50 for the year, and I get halfway through the summer and I decide I don't want to mow your lawn, I can sell my contract to somebody else who'd like to mow your lawn, and you know, maybe he's going to get $45, I'm going to get $5 out of it, so I'm going to skim something off it. Whatever. It's a contract.
Spoken
but you're
like
still,
a true lawyer.
You're still paying $50 because
Right,
you
yeah.
signed a contract saying you'd pay $50. On the other hand, you can't get out of it. You can't, in halfway through the year, say, hey, I don't want to go through with this anymore. I'm going to do it myself. No, you're stuck in the contract also.
So that Acme Bank,
Mm-hmm.
they may retain what's called the servicing. So I still send my checks out every month to Acme Bank, even though it's been sold through Fannie or Freddie and some pension fund in Utah.
Well,
perhaps.
you better slow down. You're going
Okay.
to lose people.
Okay.
But you are correct. That local bank or a mortgage company, it doesn't have to be a local bank, but whoever did the loan, they can sell the loan in such a way that you and I will never know they sold the loan. And that's because they retain the right to, as you call it, service the loan. In other words, they accept the payments every month and they send you your monthly bill. they do all of the paperwork. They don't actually hold the note anymore. They don't have their money tied up in it, but they have kept the rights to service loan. Now, why would anybody do that? Well, because they get paid for it. If you have a $1,000 a month loan, they might get $20 a month for doing the paperwork.
If they have 50,000 loans, that adds up.
It adds up.
Yeah. But is there, when they go through this process of selling them off through Fannie or Freddie, is there an additional document that would be signed that would transfer the ownership of that mortgage to the group of investors? Didn't that always happen? Is that something that we stopped doing?
Back in the old days,
Okay, we're talking 20 plus years ago.
20 years, actually even maybe 10 years, it started to kind of break down. If the bank sold the loan to, and Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac were sometimes a little different, but we'll say, if they sold the loan to Fannie Mae, there would be two things would happen. The note, on the back of it, the bank would say, we sell our rights in this note to Fannie Mae. And that note would go to Fannie Mae, and Fannie Mae is now the holder of the note. They've got the piece of paper. If you don't pay, they can go to court and say, I've got the note that Charlie Flannery signed, and Charlie Flannery says, wait a minute, I did that to the such and such bank, and they flip it over, and the such and such bank has sold their interest in it to us. We own it.
Now, does that or should that instrument have been recorded at the Registry of Deeds?
No,
No.
because you have your note and your mortgage.
Okay.
So that's what you do with the note. With the mortgage, you don't do anything because that is now a public record forever.
Okay.
You have what is called an assignment. You are assigning that mortgage to someone else. So it'd be the same thing. The local bank says, we're the holder of this mortgage from Charlie Flannery, and we are assigning it to Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae is now the holder of the mortgage. Now the note, the public never sees. That's in a file somewhere.
But they do see the assignment.
You see
on
the
record.
assignment, because
Okay.
that's at the Registry of Deeds. That is
Okay.
a public record.
Okay. So everything was humming along. This was all working. Did Fannie, when they would sell it off to that pension fund in Utah, did they then also do an assignment on that end of the transaction that would be something that would be public record that we could see?
Well, that gets a little more complicated.
Okay. Well, before we get into a complicated topic like that, we're going to have to take a break for a couple of public service announcements. Please don't touch that dial.
Some things require experts at every stage.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Others are more just a matter of taste and preference.
Just the way I like them.
Buying a home falls somewhere in between. That's why you should visit HomeLoanLearningCenter.com for expert guidance. A website where you can learn just how you should go about buying a home. You'll get facts, tools, and impartial advice. From seeing a lender to settlement and beyond, there's a step-by-step explanation of the process. All at HomeLoanLearningCenter.com.
Houston, we have a solution.
Think of it as mission control for buying a home. That's HomeLoanLearningCenter.com.
This is a message from HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Can you afford your home loan? Could your mortgage payment increase in a few months to something you can't afford? Hi, I'm Ruby D. If you're not sure you can continue to make your mortgage payments, call a government-approved housing counselor in your community for free and confidential help. Keep your home. Know your loan. Call today.
Call 877-HUD-1515. That's 877-HUD-1515 or go to HUD.gov.
Hi, thanks for staying tuned and welcome back to our second half of Let's Talk Real Estate. We've been talking with attorney Burke Fountain. We're trying to get a basic grasp of what a mortgage is, the various steps that it goes through, and we're going to eventually be talking about the foreclosure process. So if you'd like to take some notes and send some questions in, we're going to put up an email address for later that you can send your questions in. We're going to have Burke back on for a second episode, and we're going to answer some of your specific questions. But moving on, we had just touched upon a mortgage has been assigned to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. That assignment is now on record at the local registry of deeds. And then what happens once it leaves Fannie or Freddie's hands to that pension fund in Utah?
Well, you got to back up a little, and it got a lot more complicated.
Okay.
Several of the big banks and some of the Wall Street firms looked at what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were doing and said, we could do this and make money. So, not to say that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac didn't have enough issues of their own, but when Wall Street got involved, things really got out there. And then the big banks and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I think, were involved, set up something they called Mortgage Electronic Registration System Corporation.
MERS. I see that in a lot of foreclosure notices.
You sure do. And the idea behind that was that, as we just talked about, you record a mortgage at the registry of deeds, and it's in the name of the bank, and now the bank sells the loan. And we use the example of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but sometimes it's to another bank, and then that bank sells to another bank and sells to another bank, and every time you have to have a piece of paper that goes to the registry of deeds. And at this point, you've got somebody sitting at a desk in South Dakota who's looking at some paperwork, and they're not checking the records at the registry of deeds. And then you started to have mistakes, and paperwork didn't catch up. It's already been sold again, and the first paper didn't get recorded, so you've got it going from A to B, and then from D to F, and whatever happened to C in the middle, and got messy. So they set up MERS, and the idea behind MERS was that right at the closing table, when you signed that mortgage, you didn't sign it to the local bank anymore. You signed right to MERS. And it goes to MERS, and the note goes to, well, it's still held by the bank, but MERS kind of keeps an eye on it. And they could shuffle this thing around all they wanted, and now they can get the pension funds involved, and now they can slice and dice this thing, and you and I don't need to know anything about it.
Just keep sending the check every month.
You just keep sending the check every month, and MERS takes care of all the paperwork. And
They sound like wonderful people.
well, MERS is interesting. It doesn't actually have any employees, it turns out.
Is it a virtual company?
Well, kind of, because the people from each of the banks that are involved are assigned to be vice presidents of MERS on the side. And some judges don't really like this, that these people are signing that they're a vice president of MERS, but their paycheck comes from, any one of the big banks. And it just keeps getting more complicated and more muddled.
Every time I saw the MERS in a foreclosure, I just presumed that was a way that the banks had come up with to streamline the electronic transfer of all this data that pertained to ownership of the mortgage. Is that how it
Well,
was supposed
you are
to function?
correct, and I like the words you used, the electronic streaming of this. But unfortunately, both the Registry of Deeds, which keeps the records, and if things don't go well when it goes to court, this electronic streaming isn't really what people are looking for. The Registry of Deeds needs a piece of paper with a signature on it which says that, you know, somebody's transferred their rights in a deed or in a mortgage or whatever from wherever to wherever. And if a bank is unhappy that somebody hasn't paid their mortgage and they want to foreclose and they need to go to court, the judges want to see a piece of paper with a signature on it, which shows that it went from here to here to here and that this entity is the right one.
So they don't care that the person who signed the original mortgage note that indentured them to a particular lender, they don't care that they haven't made a payment for a year or two. That's
Well,
immaterial as far as whether or not you, the new MERS guy, have any standing to actually move to foreclose, right?
Well, and I see both sides of that, and I've had people say to me that, well, maybe this bank or MERS or whatever, maybe their paperwork isn't perfect, but if this guy hasn't made a payment in a year or two, it's time to get him out of the house. Well, I agree with that, but courts are a little fussier, and when you try to sell, you foreclose and everything, and then you try to sell that property, the attorneys looking at it for the next person thinking of buying it, they're a little fussier about, well, if you weren't really the right entity to do this foreclosure and you really didn't hold that note and you didn't hold that mortgage, what rights do you have to be foreclosing and putting this person out in the street and signing a new deed to my person?
What specific problems have you run into in your experience as a practicing real estate attorney in situations similar to this? Have you encountered any yet where there was some cloud on the ownership and?
Oh, sure. I have one going right now. It's been going for 6 months, and the bankers and attorneys don't understand why I have a problem. I've got one paper signed by Jane Doe, who's vice president of a mortgage company, and she is signing as attorney, well, with power of attorney on behalf of Wells Fargo. I've got another paper signed by her, and she's signing as vice president of Wells Fargo. And I've pointed out that this doesn't jive, and I got an answer back with an affidavit from an attorney explaining why everything's okay with a whole bunch of papers attached. And one of the papers says that Jane Doe is vice president of something or other Default Services, Inc. I can't keep up with all the hats this person wears.
It's like, hello? Oh, you want, I'm sorry, you want accounting. Hold on. Accounting? Yeah.
And they've made the paperwork, I don't know. I don't understand how they do it, how they can, I know they've got millions and millions of pieces of paper, but I mean, these pieces of paper, each one is worth $100, $200 million. I think they'd be a little careful with them.
There are so many ways we can take this. I mean, because issues have been raised lately in Massachusetts by our Attorney General, Martha Coakley, and several other attorneys generals across the country. Their position is that we were not that these were not properly handled, so they're raising that issue. I read somewhere where, in defiance of the what used to be called the Soldiers and Sailors Act, that some banks have moved to foreclose people that were called up to active duty, and that's a whole other can of worms. Those are going to be some of the topics we can cover on our next episode. If you have any questions concerning the foreclosure process, please send an email to letstalkrealestate@verizon.net, and I will get those questions over to Attorney Burke Fountain, and in our next episode, we'll try to cover as many as we can. There's so many things we've got to talk about. Is a homestead helpful? What happens if I'm in the active military? What happens if I file a Chapter 7 or 13 bankruptcy? A million different things. And every situation is different. Sometimes the pain and suffering is the same, but every situation is different. So please, again, that email address is letstalkrealestate@verizon.net. And if you'd like to get a free copy of today's episode, please send along to that same address, letstalkrealestate@verizon.net. Please include your name, your address, and your telephone number so that we can confirm who you are. And that's for the first 100 respondents only, because we can't do this all day. And we will get those answered for you. Please come back to our next show. It's going to be mind-blowing. Thanks for tuning in today to Let's Talk Real Estate. Burke, thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here.
Look forward to answering those questions for the folks.
Okay.
All of you people, please stay safe. Thank you.